Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp. I am joined once again by my friend Jim Merrills as we are going to discuss Lesson 12 here in Genesis. We are nearing the end. This is the penultimate lesson. And we are still, of course, in the life of Joseph. We're going to be with Joseph and Jacob until the end. And this lesson in particular is called Joseph, Prince of Egypt. I wonder where they got that title, Prince of Egypt, from. It sounds really familiar for some reason. Huh. I feel like they could have called it How to Gain Power and Influence People, or maybe even like a textbook of redemptive revenge, because there's a little bit of that. There's a lot going on here in this story with Joseph in Egypt, and it's more than a movie or even a Sabbath School class can cover. There's a richness to this story that I hope by the end of this we will appreciate even more, and you can bring it out in your class if you're a teacher, or you can make a comment if you are a class member. Okay, so we're going to begin on Sunday, where it's called Joseph's Rise to Power, which, by the way, is also the title in the NET, the little above the text there, Joseph's Rise to Power. And so, Jim, can you walk us through this? What's going on here? We last left Joseph. He had been taken to Egypt. He was thrown in jail. He was rescued by Potiphar, then thrown in jail again, and helped Pharaoh interpret dreams. So that's kind of where we left Joseph off here. Where are we finding him in Genesis chapter 41?
Yeah, I mean, there's like a quick scene here. I mean, next thing we know, he's in power. He's in power of a world power. I'm not sure if he would be. I don't know if Egypt was the world power at this particular point. Could be, but he is right there at the top. So we have watched this guy just. I mean, the chapters read very quickly. He's gone from prison to governor of the nation.
Yeah,
huge jump.
Yeah,
huge jump.
And this is how a lot of people's stories go who end up wielding a lot of power. I'm going through a biography of Joseph Stalin right now, which is light bedtime reading, and the guy was in prison from like 1910 to 1917. He missed the entire First World War. He was in Siberia, in a labor camp. And if someone would have said that guy is going to be one of the most powerful and ruthless rulers in the world, I'd be like, that guy who's been in prison for 7 years? The world passed him by. Why him? So don't sleep on some of these people in prison, because sometimes, whether they're good or bad, obviously Stalin is not a good character. Joseph is a good character. And so don't count him out just because he's in prison, or just because he's, in prison twice, even for that matter. He's got a record, this guy. And yet, just like that, yeah. I mean, no climbing the ladder. He just shoots to the top, doesn't he?
Yeah. And what happens at the top is obviously really the whole bulk of this week's lesson.
Yeah, so this lesson is requiring us to remember the dreams a little bit here to start it off. So if you need a little refresher on that, you might want to remind the class what the dreams were that Pharaoh had, because basically we stopped here in chapter 41, and let me get that a little more. There we go. With these dreams. And so Joseph gives some advice to Pharaoh. And I always thought this is interesting, because Joseph here just speaks of God. In verse 32, he says, the reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in two forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. And if you're Pharaoh, you're like, who's God? We're acting here like Pharaoh knows who this God is and has a relationship with this God and would listen to this God. But the fact that Pharaoh didn't understand the dreams indicates that he and this God don't know each other very well. And Joseph just kind of shows up and says, yeah, it's God. Well, which God, right? Pharaoh believes in many gods. He believes he is a god, or maybe not be at this point in Egyptian history, but that will definitely come later with the pharaohs. So Joseph gives Pharaoh some free advice. Let Pharaoh look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land of Egypt. And then, yada, 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 how to get through the famine here. Do you think Joseph is kind of like meaning himself, or is Pharaoh just no dummy, and he's like, let's see here, in verse 38. Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? Is it a case of like, yeah, you should hire somebody who has black hair and is wearing a red shirt, and I'm sure you'll find someone somewhere. Is Joseph fishing around a little bit there, or do you think Pharaoh's just no dummy and he's like, well, you interpreted the dream, it should be your job?
Yeah, you've touched on a number of things already that I'd like to highlight. A few moments ago, you were talking about how we were coming to the end of Genesis. It's
Yeah.
kind of ironic. Genesis is the book of beginnings, so we're coming to
Mm,
the end of the beginning. Okay,
come
so
on. Come on.
that's one thought. That's just one thought. The
Okay.
second thing is, I don't think we give Genesis enough credit for being a book of prophecies. I mean, for example, we have here something that is so similar to Daniel going into Babylon, King Nebuchadnezzar having his dreams, Daniel answering those dreams. Daniel and his three friends, moved right to the top in terms of Babylon. So there are a lot of similarities, especially in these closing chapters of Genesis, in terms of prophecy and such, to a book like and to a person like Daniel.
Mm,
I'll
yeah.
eventually mention the book of Revelation, but we'll just toss in Daniel to begin.
Yeah. 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 Well, I know Revelation's coming. It's inevitable. It's inevitable. But you're right. There are a lot of parallels to Daniel here. And just to get this out of the water here, we have to react to people in power differently, and we have different models of how to do it in the Bible. Of course, in Daniel and Joseph, we have them as models of this integrity. Daniel, of course, stands up to the king and refute, or his friends do, especially in chapter 3.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph doesn't have to clash with the king, of course, but we have people like Esther who relate to the monarchy a little bit differently. She's definitely more. She defies him a little bit in approaching him without permission, and so we kind of see this loyalness on one side, this loyalty on one side, but this challenge on the other. In Esther and in Daniel that we don't see quite in Joseph, because we don't see a conflict between Pharaoh and Joseph. It just seems that Pharaoh does not renounce his paganism here in order to hire Joseph. This is not an issue of, hey, God's going to save you Egyptians as long as you renounce your gods and embrace him. And that's something we would expect to see later on in the Bible when it comes to Israel, who was already in a covenant with God, right? They were required to throw away their idols and embrace God. But God doesn't make this demand of the Egyptians. And I think this is a really interesting point, that they can continue to worship these other gods and God will still save them as a people. Now, maybe this is part of God's strategy to introduce himself to these people, right? But, it's not a requirement here. It's not a requirement. So, anyways, Pharaoh's no dummy. He says, yeah, Joseph, okay, it looks like you have the spirit of this God. You're his spokesperson. You're interpreting for him. That's great. So he says, you'll be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Obviously, this is a lot of power. This is really impressive. But at the same time, I wonder if there's also a little bit of hedging here on Pharaoh's part, because it's like, okay, you're the one who's predicting this, then you're going to be the one who's responsible for it. And, if things don't go as you said, I'm going to point, and people are upset, let's say the famine comes and there's no harvest beforehand. I'm just going to point and say, well, that guy tricked us all. Let's off with his head. So, I mean, I think it's a win-win for Pharaoh here, because obviously this guy, Joseph, communicates with his God. So let's put him in charge. That ensures that if this God is telling the truth, if this God is real, then we'll be good. We'll be blessed. If the God isn't real and Joseph's making all this up, then he's going to be the one responsible for it. And so it's a win-win for Pharaoh.
Yeah, we don't have ongoing stories with the relationship with Pharaoh and Joseph as we do, let's say, with Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. So when I think of the initial contact between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, when Daniel answers the meaning of his dream and such, I mean, Nebuchadnezzar is quick to acknowledge Daniel's God. It doesn't become
Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar's God. And we have the same thing here in this story, where Pharaoh recognizes. He points out he has the spirit of the gods in him, but there's no conversion experience. There's no, hey, who's your God? I'm going to start following your God. Just like we don't have that at the beginning of Daniel's experience.
Right.
And, I think one thing that we should remember from time to time is that God used such opportunities, just like with Daniel and the faithful of the Israelites in Babylon. God has used so many of these opportunities to get the word out as to who he is as the true creator amongst these heathen lands outside of Palestine,
Right.
outside of Canaan. So here's something that's interesting is we come up with this 7 years of abundance.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we go back and look at previous stories, that number 7 has been used many, many times throughout Genesis. I mean, it began all the way back there at creation with the 7 days of the week, but we continue to see this 7. And even in this story, not only do we have the 7 years of abundance, but as we'll mention here at the close of the story, you'll have you'll have Joseph, who weeps or is said to weep 7 times. So in this story, once again, that number 7 keeps on popping up just as it has previously.
Yeah.
And I'll throw out a thing. I know you were just ready to go for a long trek there, but I'll throw out one more thing.
20 minutes here, ready to go.
So also another theme here is the throne. And the theme of the throne is consistent throughout the entire scriptures. So we have the throne here. He's telling him, listen, I'm going to give you all authority except for the throne. We come to the day of Belshazzar and his little drinking fest there in Babylon. And when the kingdom is about to fall, Daniel, we'll even give you a place amongst the two of us. We'll make you the third ruler on the throne. And then we come to the end of Revelation, and you've got Christ at the end of the 7 churches saying, if you Nike, if you overcome as I have overcome, I will share my throne with you. And so we have this throne theme that we will find throughout the entire scriptures, Genesis to Revelation.
Right. Yes. Yes, I love it. So we have the throne theme here, and it's kind of like, Joseph, you can have the power of Pharaoh, but not the title of Pharaoh. And that's an important distinction that he makes, right? But when we get to Revelation, of course, we see that God offers us both power and the throne.
Yes.
He's willing to share the throne with us. We're promised in Revelation to sit on the throne with him. And that's an important, beautiful promise there at the end. Now, our text tells us that Joseph is 30 years old when all this happens, which is incredible because, what were you doing at 30? But Joseph also has 2 sons with a woman named Asenath. Manasseh and Ephraim are his sons, which is really interesting because, again, you will have some stories in the Bible where the Israelites are told, don't intermarry with these people. And of course, we've seen that in Genesis as well. But here, Joseph is marrying an Egyptian woman, and there's no judgment on that. And so, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I think sometimes we get into our heads where we get this playbook and we think, never marry one of these people because God is against that. Yes, he is against that in many, many places in the Old Testament. And in some cases, he doesn't seem to mind. Now, maybe she believed in the one true God. I don't know. I don't know anything about her, and neither do you. I'm just saying it's not always a one-size-fits-all with some of these counsels that God gives people. She bears 2 sons for him. And like I said, Manasseh and Ephraim. Manasseh means something like he who brings about forgetfulness or makes you forget. And Ephraim means to bear fruit. And I love this because in sequence, then they kind of chronicle Joseph's journey. They're kind of memorial stones in flesh. That Joseph has forgotten his past, in part because he and has now borne fruit. And I think this really speaks to what we are promised with the new earth, which is not that we forget everything that's happened before, but it's that the fruitfulness, the goodness which we have in the new earth is so great that it makes us forget the years of famine that have gone before, spiritual famine. And so Joseph, the two sons, forgetfulness and fruit. And I think that the forgetfulness happens because he has borne so much fruit in Egypt, right? He's gotten another father figure in Pharaoh. He's gotten more honor than he had at home, even, and he's got the opportunity to save a new people, and so all of that fruit that he is now bearing has enabled him to just forget the hardships that have gone before. And I think in that forgetting is implied some forgiveness as well. That's all I got for Sunday. I'm ready to move on when you are. But if you got something to say, let's do it.
I was just going to say, as far as Manasseh, another meaning behind the name Manasseh is joy. And I think that joy is the expression that comes from being able to forget those woes of the past. And so consequently, by forgetting the troubles he's been through, there's a certain amount of joy that comes along, combined with the fruitfulness. And, so let's go back to something you just said here about him marrying an Egyptian. I like to go back to our earlier text where the Pharaoh is recognizing that Joseph is discerning and wise. I think we need to be also discerning and wise, and I think we need to make sure that we understand the principles of God's word. There's a big difference between, let's say, making the choice, and I'm thinking of a young Samson here, but there's a difference between making the choice to, well, I really don't find what I'm looking for amongst, the faithful women of God. That's not what's happening with Joseph. I mean, Joseph is a young man. He's living down here. He's got a grandfather who came out of Babylon. So let's be easy here about, where people live, right?
Right.
We had a priest that Abraham was acknowledging who was amongst the heathen up there in Canaan, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think to your point, we need to be careful that we don't take the word of God and necessarily literalize every situation and make it into something that the word of God is not saying.
Yes. I completely agree. As Ellen White famously said, circumstances change the meaning of things. And, that's why we've got to have a living relationship with God to tell us, in this circumstance, what should I do? Because our tendency is, I don't need God. I see Israel did this and Israel did that and God told them this. So that means that's what I must do right now. Not necessarily, right? Not necessarily.
Yeah, and I think that turning to God, as you say, and being in a prayerful mind with him on a regular basis is going to bring that discerning and wise element to our minds.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we have a situation with Joseph's in power in Egypt here, and there's the famine reaches up into Canaan, as it always seems to in Genesis, and the brothers have to come down. What's really interesting is just how dense the brothers are in this chapter. It's in chapter 42 here. I mean, you look at this here. So Jacob's the one who learns that there's grain in Egypt, and then he says to them, why do you keep looking at each other? I just love that. Like, why are you standing around being useless? Like, go get some food. Why do we got to wait till news reaches Dad? Why isn't one of them stepping up saying, Dad, we're going hungry. There's grain in Egypt. Let's go get some. And so he says, go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. I mean, it's like a basic thing. We want to live and not die. Guys, come on. Your passivity here is going to kill us all, and all of them. So it's just
let's be fair to these boys. However, we have some family stories here about things not going too well when it comes to Egypt. So who knows what their thoughts about the land down under are really like.
Yes, and that very well is true, but I'm just saying, when you're hungry, your qualms about your neighbors kind of go out the window, I would think. I mean, who's so stubborn as to not like their neighbor and would rather starve to death rather than go down and ask for food. I just
Yeah.
so anyways, I just think it's funny that it's Jacob's initiative here to go get the food. But of course, Jacob withholds Benjamin. And I think this is a really, really telling detail because it suggests to me that Jacob does not fully trust his other sons with Benjamin. Which makes me wonder, does Jacob suspect that there was some foul play involved with Joseph? Whether he thinks that they did something or whether he thinks that maybe they were negligent. Like, he went down to check on you, you guys should have been looking after him, or something like that. Even if it's not really well founded. Sometimes we're not rational and we're like, well, you should have done something. Well, I was 500 miles away. What did you want me to do? Well, you should have done something. Like sometimes people think along those lines. Did Jacob, even if he sincerely believed a wild animal had killed Joseph, did he kind of subconsciously still blame his other sons for it? Like, why doesn't he trust them with Benjamin?
So you're suggesting it may not just be a simple issue of, hey, this is the other child from the woman who I truly loved. You're thinking maybe Dad had a little more awareness of maybe something in the past.
I think so. I mean, look, there's 10 brothers. Undoubtedly, there are some servants or something who could probably journey as well. You should be safe in the company of, let's say, 24 people going down to Egypt. I mean, these are well-traveled roads down to Egypt. Obviously, there's always a risk, but you can't be afraid of a wild animal if you're sending a dozen or 24 people down. Benjamin should be safe in their company. There might be some of that old favoritism, right? Because he's the only son I have left from Rachel. And
look at the favoritism that we previously saw with Joseph.
Yeah. It seems that maybe some of that is transferred down to Benjamin. He's the only one he's got left, and he'll make that very clear to them later on in case they are not aware of it. But again, why would you not trust Benjamin in the brothers' company? There's more than enough of them. They're traveling well-traveled roads down to a very populous country, Egypt. It suggests to me that Jacob suspects something. Like, he doesn't fully trust them. We'll just put it that way. He doesn't fully trust them to keep Benjamin safe. That's my take on it.
Hey, you know what? Parents are pretty perceptive of the character of their children.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very possible that over time, with just the right questions and overhearing certain comments, that Jacob may not be completely in the dark here in terms of the jealousies and such that were going on.
Yeah. That's what I think. I can't prove anything, but again, this will be a little bit clear here towards the end of this story, because what's about to happen is this tension is ratcheting up between this Joseph, who the brothers don't recognize, and of course the brothers and the father. So the brothers are kind of in between Joseph, and they're in between the father. Like, if you just kind of put them on opposite ends here, the brothers are in between, having to go back and forth, and they're having to deal with Joseph's apparent hostility toward them as this Egyptian ruler, and they're having to deal with their father's mistrust of them. So the brothers are in a real tight space in this story. They're having to kind of navigate this complex, basically, I mean, to oversimplify it, the hostility they get from both ends. Now, their father isn't openly hostile, but I mean, just the kind of he doubts them or he mistrusts them, and so does the ruler of Egypt. He doubts them and mistrusts them. So they're having to get it both ways. So basically, Joseph assumes the demeanor of their father, and of course, he can't quite know it, what his father is doing up there or how he's treating them. But they're basically stuck between two versions of their father in two different places. And they have to come face to face with this broken relationship the brothers seem to have with their father. And that's what this story is all about here. It's not just about saving Egypt. The story is about saving relationships in this family of God that is being created here. You ready for some interesting parallels?
I'm listening.
All right. So when they do arrive there, of course, Joseph recognizes them. They don't recognize Joseph. He accuses them here of being spies. He says he takes on kind of a harsh tone with them. And I think that could be explainable because, honestly, if you have food and no one else around you has food, you are ripe for invasion. So you got to be suspicious of people. But what's interesting is that the brothers come and bow down before Joseph, right? Just as the dream foretold. Joseph accuses his brothers of being spies, which is exactly what they saw him as when he was younger, coming to spy for the father. So now he's accusing them of that. And then, of course, he throws his brothers in the prison, just as he was ultimately thrown in the prison because they sold him into slavery. The same word for Hebrew words for prison and days here, mishmar and yamim, are used in both cases of Joseph being in prison and them being put in prison. And now the brothers, for the first time, feel distress at being forcibly separated from each other. In other words, he's making them feel what he had to feel. So, in other words, it seems that Joseph's strategy here is to make his brothers feel what he had to go through. Like, they have to go through a very similar experience here. They're accused of being spies. They're kind of betrayed and thrown into prison. They're having to be separated from one another, not knowing if they'll ever be made whole again as a family. So everything he felt, they have to now go through. And I think those parallels are fascinating.
So how is it that he recognizes them and they don't recognize him?
Well, he's probably shaven. And he's, if he was a teenager and let's just say 10 years have passed because he's 30 now, it could be more, it could be 10, 15 years. I think people can change a lot physically in those years.
So you say shaven, so he was a pretty woolly-faced little kid when he left. Now, I have no problem with what you're suggesting there. Here's a couple of thoughts. So I want to put a plug here for archaeology because one, he is young when he leaves, so chances are he probably has changed more in appearance than his older brothers have since he's seen them. Secondly, when he does talk, he is not speaking their language, and he's probably picked up a good amount of I can't think of the word, but he definitely has some of the Egyptian sound to his speech. Yeah, I'm just lacking the right word here.
An accent.
An accent. Thank you. A Southern accent. Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, you just even here in the United States, you travel from the northern states to the southern states, and sometimes you have to listen. I don't know, maybe that's more New Jersey and the East Coast. Both ways. You're based around here in the Midwest, so you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But here's a plug for archaeology. Go down here, for example, to the University of Illinois, and go there to the great archaeological museum they have. It's referred to as the Oriental Institute. And when you look back in terms of archaeology at a lot of the Egyptian rulers, it may be a little surprised to find out how much makeup these rulers wore. And so it's very possible that if Joseph had some of the now don't go there with the makeup thing. Anyway,
he had jewelry and makeup. He had the little the coal above his eyes.
Yes. And so when I look at archaeology, I say to myself, it could have been really hard for them to tell that this is their brother with all of these changes to him.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I agree with you completely. He's also out of place. You know how sometimes like a person, even a person really well, but you're not expecting to see them somewhere, and it takes you a minute. Yeah.
Yes.
Definitely.
Now, one other thing here, you were talking a bit about Benjamin. I just want to throw out, because we like to throw out these biblical numbers and the symbolism, but I would like to point out that if Benjamin had gone with them, that would have thrown off the whole testing thing. because see, Benjamin would have made 11. And we know in the scriptures that 10 is the number of testing. And so by
Yeah.
sending the 10 brothers, we are able to perfect the test. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yes, I'm sure that was exactly what was going through everybody's mind when they were arranging this. Though, here's what I mean. I was alluding earlier to how Jacob must feel about his sons, and it really comes down here to um, verse 36, where they come back. I'm not going to go through the whole story. It's a long story. They come back from meeting Joseph, and Simeon is stuck in jail. And their father Jacob said to them, "You have deprived me of my children." Right? You, brothers, my sons, have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. I mean, that's a really strong statement of showing how Jacob really feels about this. Now, is it their
Yep.
fault that Simeon's in jail? No, not at
Right.
all. Is it their fault? I mean, it is their fault that Joseph is gone. But in the father's mind, he may very well believe that Joseph was truly killed by a wild animal, but he still blames them.
This
He
really
still
goes
blames them
back.
for all of this.
This really goes back to that early family line. Am I my
Mm-hmm.
brother's keeper? And in Jacob's mind, yes, you are.
Yes. Yep. And it's really awkward because how do the brothers tell this guy in Egypt, this lord in Egypt, we would go get our younger brother, but our father doesn't trust us with him? How do you explain that to somebody like that? I mean, it sounds like a cop out because it's like, how dysfunctional are you people that your father doesn't trust you? Um, there's some deep emotional things happening in this story, and it's aggravating. It's painful to watch. It's like one of those emotional dramas that actually just hurts you to watch it because it's so real and so near to experiences that we can have with our own families, and how deep some of these wounds go. These guys need counseling. I've said it before. This whole patriarchal line, every generation needs to sit down with somebody and talk about this stuff, because you think to yourself, if it's been 10 or 15 years since Joseph was quote unquote killed in his father's eyes, how long is he going to carry this burden of anger or mistrust or blame? I mean, Jacob, buddy, you and your sons need to sit down and talk about this. And maybe the truth might have come out. I don't know.
You know what you just said there over the last probably minute or two, I think is an excellent springboard for what now happens in terms of their thinking. Well, for example, so we have a text here where and we're reminded of where this wording came from earlier when they plotted to sell Joseph. The words back then was, they said to one another. Well, now once again, they are saying to one another, and this time we bring
Mm-hmm.
in this line about therefore this distress. Now, this word distress, Sarah, this is a word that we have encountered a number of other times in previous stories here in Genesis. This distress is not strong enough. Tribulation, troubles. This is a very strong word, and so now that they realize what is happening to them, all of a sudden the guilt,
Yeah.
sets in once they realize this,
Mm-hmm.
and now they're saying, okay, what we did in the past, it is now coming back on us. But there's something more here to this, and that is we talk about this blood here. So you've got Reuben, and
Mm-hmm.
keep in mind now, Reuben was the brother who tried to save Joseph's life way back when. Okay,
Yes.
let's not kill the boy. All right,
Right.
and
Yes.
his wording, Reuben's wording, way back when his brother is sold, was let's not shed any blood.
Yes.
Now Reuben states his blood is now required of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Reuben,
Mm-hmm.
Reuben understands you don't have to actually shed blood to
Yes.
cause the death
Yes.
of one.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
we've got some powerful stuff going on here. And
Mm-hmm.
so let me say it this way: there's more than one way to shed someone's blood.
Oof.
Right?
Oof. Yes.
Okay. And if I may, I'll go to the words of Jesus, who points out, if you hate your brother, you've already murdered your brother. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You've already shed the blood, because that's
Yeah.
the ultimate end of what hate is.
Yeah.
And we have this, of course, in the whole gospel, between Satan hating Christ to the extent that he will make sure this guy is silenced. His blood will be taken, although that plan turned out completely the opposite of what Satan had
Right.
intended.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and then if I can go one more step further, we're talking
Do it.
about this shedding of the blood. We're talking about this taking of the life. Well, even this word guilt, this word Hashem, this word guilty, that they feel guilty, this is the same term that is used to designate the sacrifice at the time of atonement. So, I
Mm.
mean, we've got some major, heavy blood issues going on right here.
Yes. 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 We do. Yeah. It definitely reminds you of Cain and Abel. About the blood is, what is, in Hebrew, it says also his blood. Look, it is required of us, as you were pointing out. In other words, somebody's got to be held accountable for the blood
Mm-hmm.
being spilled. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think what's really interesting is that the basically the test that Joseph sets up for his brothers to go get Benjamin. It seems really simple, but Joseph knows his family. He knows the dynamics of his family, and what he's basically challenging them to do. If you want to eat, go rebuild your relationship with your father so that he will trust you with his favorite son.
Mm. Mm.
And and
Wow.
and Joseph really sticks his finger in that wound, because when they do bring Benjamin and he throws a feast for them, he gives Benjamin, what was it, like 5 times as much food as everybody else. Like, he's sitting there showing favoritism to the favorite son in their
Yes.
presence to see how
Yes.
they're going to react, right? Are you guys over this jealousy thing? Are you going to hate Benjamin now because someone's showing him favoritism? You guys got to
Yeah.
get over this.
Yeah.
But I mean, the test is basically to basically replay what happened between them and Joseph and choose something different.
Oh, and
And
he is just hitting on this
yes,
elevation of the youngest. I mean, he's referring to him as my brother. He's referring
yes,
to him as my son. I mean, those brothers had to be sitting there wondering, what
yes,
is this about?
yes, 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 yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. We talk. I mean, Joseph could have just come out and said, "Hey guys, I'm Joseph," and I don't know how things would have went. It could have went well. He has all the power here. He could force them to apologize if he wanted to. But he makes them go through this. And I think sometimes God leads us into these moments that we don't recognize, but they're really second chances. And it's not that we're saved by our second chances per se, but it's God wants to see if we've changed. So here you go again, buddy. You fell on this test before. Now here's another test. Let's see if you've made any progress. And it looks like the brothers have. And
Yes, and
they passed the test well.
I was just talking about the hate being equal to murder, and I'm
Yeah.
reminded here in my notes where Ellen White, speaking on this story, points out that, according to her, that Joseph had hoped to ascertain whether that hatred was still within them and
Yes.
desired to test them on this. I'll
Yeah.
tell you, that word hate is no small word, is it?
No, it's no small word. And if they would have held on to that hatred, I mean, I don't know what would have happened, but presumably they would have starved. And ultimately, our sin is self-defeating. Ultimately, our sin is self-defeating, and that's what the wages of sin are. That's what we see in Revelation at the lake of fire. Ultimately, those who hang on to sin go with that sin into the fire. It's not a sustainable way to live. Now, I want to turn over to Tuesday. We got 45 seconds left. we're we're on track as usual here. Okay, so Tuesday is basically, I already touched on this a little bit. That's when Benjamin shows up. Monday, this chapter here, 42, is ending on a little bit of a cliffhanger here. Jacob refuses to send Benjamin. I mean, even Reuben's even like, "Hey, you can kill my sons if I don't bring him back to you. Please trust me." I mean, it's bold. I mean, it's desperate. Like, you can kill my sons if I don't bring him back to you. It's like, I mean, what stronger statement can you possibly make? Of course, it may be meaningless, because under what circumstances is Jacob going to actually kill Reuben's sons? Probably not. But it shows the earnestness with which Reuben wants to be trusted by his father with this task. But Jacob refuses to. He says, my son, not your brother, my son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead, and he's the only one left. And you think to yourself, you have other sons, buddy. Well, he's acting like he had two sons, and one of them is dead, right? My son will not go down. His brother is dead, and he's the only one left. And it's like, oh, the dynamics of this family is so painful. But ultimately, what is the catalyst for healing this family? It's the famine, because the famine forces Jacob to send Benjamin at long last. And he holds out as long as he can. He suffers because he hangs on to this anger and this pride and whatever else Jacob has. Because he hangs on to that, they have to stretch their food a little bit longer than they probably should. And they're suffering because of this. As a family, they're suffering because they can't seem to make amends with each other.
Let me throw out something here.
Yeah.
Okay, you've been pastoring for a good bit, and you come from a family, and you have all your family, extended family, so you know about what I'm about to say here. And his brothers were 20 years younger when all this took place, when they sold him.
Yeah.
I'm going to grant that as these young men have grown up, that they have come to understand better what the father went through for the love of his life, his wife.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. These men have grown up, and as they have grown up and become more mature young men, which they must be, because they're obviously past the jealousy and hatred and all that Joseph tests them with.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna give it to these boys that as they have grown up, as often we come to learn more about our family. We come to learn more about what our family, what our parents have been through. And as we grow and as we mature and as wisdom begins to set in, we can better appreciate some of the decisions, some of the choices, and some of the experience of our family members that we were not able to really have those kind of thoughts and really contemplate them more deeply when we were younger.
Yes.
And so I'm tending to think that these guys, they've come to understand what their father has been through.
Mm-hmm. Maybe so. I mean, there's a number of ways this thing could have gone. They could have realized our dad is really messed up, and maybe we shouldn't have blamed Joseph because he was a victim like us. His dad lavished all these privileges on him and honors on him, and he was too young to know any better. So, maybe Joseph got a little too full of himself when he was younger, but he was a kid. And maybe we were too hard on him for being jealous of this kid when it wasn't his fault. He didn't ask for the coat. He didn't ask to be the favorite. It's these family dynamics that have been with us for generations that dad is playing with. And maybe we shouldn't have been so hard on him. And we have regret about that. I don't know. It could have gone that way too, right? Where they sometimes when you get older, you realize.
And not only that, but when this situation happens down in Egypt and their response is, hey, this distress, this trouble, this relation has now come upon us, that suggests to me that there's been years of guilt about what they had done. And when this occasion comes upon them, this is now we are paying the price for what had happened.
Yes. Absolutely. Yep. Well, it's interesting also. So I'm a little bit harder on Jacob here than I think the brothers, because the brothers seem to have shown some progress. Like they're eager here to be trusted by dad again, but dad is stubborn as a mule, and it takes starvation. I mean, think about that. How wrapped up in your own mess do you need to be that it takes the threat of starvation to get you to finally trust your kids, however begrudgingly, however unwillingly, to finally start making some progress here with your family. I mean, that's how dire it is. And, again, just because a bad thing's happening in your life doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Maybe God allowed this famine to happen here purely to fix this family. I think about that a little bit. Goodness gracious. He needs them to get this stuff together. And so the brothers say, yeah, Jacob's the great schemer, and he has had an encounter with the Lord, it's true, but he's worried about his own son scheming against him, maybe, and killing Jacob or being neglectful. He's worried about the Egyptian ruler that he hears about being a schemer. And so, what is his final word on the matter? He says, "If I am bereaved, I am bereaved." Like, oh well. And it's like, goodness gracious. He's just kind of given up here. And he's like, look, if it's meant to be that I'm supposed to be childless, then I'll be childless. And it's like, okay, first of all, you have other children, but second of all, that's really bleak.
So here's something else though that I think may play into that line about being childless. I'm going to assume that this man who is a covenant heir, okay, he is a covenant heir. He has wrestled with God. Okay, he has overcome, but he still sees himself in line with the promises of the great covenant. And it would appear to me that in his mind, it is not these sons of Leah who are going to maintain that covenant line. It is his child over here. And I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why I emphasize this covenant, because covenant has been emphasized throughout all these stories. It's a theme that runs throughout. But there's something else here, and I'm kind of going into Wednesday here. If you're following me on that time scale, but the sanctuary themes keep on popping up here. So, for example, just a little bit ago, we had one reference to the sanctuary when we were looking at this word guilt, this Hebrew word ashim, guilty, and in the fact that it designates the sacrifice for atonement. And now, when we come to Wednesday, we actually hit a few more words that are also sanctuary themed. So, for example, we haven't discussed the cup yet, but the cup that comes up in this story, this cup of Joseph's, this word here, Gabia, as I was noting here, designates also the golden bowl of the lampstand in the tabernacle. And then once again, when we have Judah stepping in saying, here, take me instead of my younger brother Benjamin, we have the same language here that we find in the earlier story of the family, where the ram is instead of Isaac. And so what we're finding here is we have a number of pieces that go with the whole sanctuary and the gospel and the covenant. And so when he makes that statement about being childless, I'm just led to believe that in his mind, this has got to be the son that the covenant will continue through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that may very well may be true. Absolutely. You mentioned Wednesday and this divination cup, which is definitely going to be a provocative title to bring out in class. What I think is interesting is that Joseph's scheming here to put the money back in the brothers' bags and all that in the cup is actually used redemptively. The scheming, the cleverness, the trickery is not necessarily an evil trait. It's about how it's used.
The means does justify the end. Is that what you're telling me, Matthew?
I think so. But I think it's like, how is it being used here? And he's using it to make this. I mean, it's an elaborate scheme. I mean, like, this could be a movie here
Oh
with all
yeah,
of the intricate parts that are going on here. I mean, it really is a super elaborate scheme. And anyways, the brothers here, when he puts the cup back in, this is a special cup, his personal cup. And when he puts it in the brother's bag, the guards catch up with them, and they're like, whoever stole the cup, let's find out what happens. And the brothers are like, we didn't steal no cup. If anyone stole the cup, we'll kill them, which is really an unfortunate thing to say, because the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. And so you realize, that maybe should have been a promise you shouldn't make, because imagine explaining that to your father. We made a rash promise to kill anybody who had the cup, and it was Benjamin. So sorry, Dad. It's like you came this close, this close to giving your father a heart attack and having to live with everything you promised would not happen.
yeah.
The theme of that moment comes really, really, really close to what happened with Joseph, right? Here they are, rashly promising to kill their father's favorite son, and it's like, that's a little too close to home here, guys.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so anyway,
Hey,
uh-huh.
by the way, did you notice that the Sabbath School lesson saves Joseph? Yes. Here's the statement. Here's the statement from the Sabbath School lesson. It is saving Joseph. It's talking about his divination cup. And it says that the fact that he used this divination cup did not mean that he believed in his power. So, under the authority of the Sabbath School lesson, we can trust he did not believe in it. But actually, even though I'm being a little facetious with that, here's the statement that I found interesting also from Ellen White. And quote, was willing to have them believe that he could read the secrets of their lives. So I just thought it was very interesting that she notices or notes here that, you know what? I may not believe in what this cup can do. I may not believe in all these things down here in this land. But, in this situation, I'm willing to let you think that I believe in this.
Yeah. And that very well may be what happened. I don't know. I don't like making sweeping statements about what people back then believed or didn't believe, simply on the basis of it being correct or not for them to have believed it or not believed it. Look, we're a mess. I mean, look at Adventists. I mean, you can say, well, he couldn't be an Adventist because he was drinking or something. And it's like, there are Adventists who drink. Should they drink? Is a whole conversation to have. But my point is none of us are perfectly consistent with our beliefs. We can't assume that everybody in the past was perfectly consistent either. Now, I do agree in this case that the cup was a pretext because, they might have believed the superstition about these pagan Egyptians and thinking that they could see the future with these divination things and all that kind of stuff. I think Joseph was definitely playing on that because Joseph has no other indication that he had anything to do with these Egyptian gods whatsoever or any other gods. But yeah, he's definitely playing on that. And again, that's something that might make Christians today a little uncomfortable. Like, should we even be pretending that we have things like divination cups? But Joseph did. And it seems to have been effective. Like, the brothers believed in its power, which may say more about them than anything else.
It is interesting. We speak about this cup here, and once again, we find some unique parallel here with Daniel. In Daniel, the first chapter is the utensils that are taken out of Israel's sanctuary to include the cup from the table of showbread, brought over to Babylon, put in Babylon's temple. And then later on, was it chapter 4 or 5 there, where you have Belshazzar, who has his party and says, hey, bring me that cup there from the tabernacle of the Israelites, and I'll drink my wine out of that this evening. So it's very interesting that we have a lot of parallels here with Daniel, even the emphasis on the cup that brought down that nation.
Yes, absolutely. It seems that a lot of these things are revolving around the cup. Pharaoh's cupbearer, and you're right, and Belshazzar in the cup. Absolutely. Now, there's a turning point in this story happens when, of course, Benjamin is accused of stealing the cup. which just you can just imagine the horror that the brothers feel about this.
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
and and so,
mm.
anyways, so they get in and I think I'm in the wrong chapter. I got to get over to chapter 44 here. Um, yeah. So, anyways, this is where this episode. So, anyways, they're having to explain why Benjamin is so important to Joseph, right? And he says, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One of them went away from me. They delicately put it here. And here they're careful to say he has been torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. How ironic. Anyway, so basically, um, they explain we guaranteed the boy's safety. Da 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 da. But there's a turning point, I think, when up above. Let's see here. Let's see, where's it at? With Judah. I know Judah speaks here in verse 18. But anyways, what is it? Is it in chapter 45? I wonder. No. Let's see here. It's got to be in 44. Yeah, here it is. Verse, right, staring me in the face. Verse 33 here, where Judah says, "Let me, your servant, remain here as my Lord's slave in place of the boy." So you get to a point, finally, with these brothers, where one of them is willing to sacrifice himself so that the favored son, Benjamin, can live. Rather than sacrifice the favored son in order to save their own skin, so to speak, they want to. One of them is willing to sacrifice himself in order for another brother to live, and they finally understand what it means like to be in a family, a healthy family. That's
Yeah,
the kind of attitude you expect.
yeah. Which brother did you say this was?
Judah,
Interesting.
yeah,
It,
verse
it, it,
18 is when he starts talking.
may I run over to Revelation chapter 5 real quick and just mention it is from the tribe of Judah that we have the Lamb in Revelation 5 who
Uh-huh.
provides himself instead. Okay, but must I go further? Do we see
Yeah,
the
you
connection
got it.
here?
You
Okay,
got it.
Judah is so important to this story. His name comes up all the way down in Revelation chapter 5 with Christ, who becomes the substitute for us.
Yes.
We have type and
Absolutely.
antitype here, people. Type and antitype.
That's right. And I think that this decision has factored in really well with the blessing that Judah is going to receive here as well, because this is where that great prophecy comes from of you know, the scepter is not going to depart from the tribe of Judah until
Yep.
the one who's going to come is going to come. We'll get into that in our next lesson. But the point is that this action of being willing to sacrifice himself, Judah up until this point is by no means guilt free. Okay, he's
No.
he's not innocent necessarily. He's complicit in this, but he at least has learned this lesson. And I think because of that willingness to sacrifice himself, you remember first he offers his father, saying, "You can kill my kids if I should fail to bring Benjamin back to you safely." So he's making basically the same kind of statement there. He's not offering himself; he's offering his kids. So that's very generous of you. But but it still would be a sacrifice of the thing that he loves the most. And now when he gets to Egypt, he's offering himself. So now Judah has offered both himself and his children as a kind of a substitute for somebody else. And
No, no,
now,
no,
uh-huh.
no, no. I just want to highlight here. I know we could kind of smile at the fact that he might be offering his son, but let's
Yeah.
remember John, the Gospel of John, for the
Yeah.
Father so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. I
Yeah.
you and I have recently seen some or heard and seen some of the tragic stories that have been on the news of recent with people losing loved ones.
Yeah.
And there I mean there are so many of us who would rather give our own lives than see the
Yeah.
life of our child taken. And so while
Yes.
we might smile upon, how he comes out and says, "Here, you can have my child," but yet the reality is, I think most of us would say, "Tell you what, take me before you touch my
Of
child."
course. Of course.
Yep.
Yeah, of course we
Yep.
would. It just really makes you wonder, what if one of these brothers had this attitude back when the others were trying to sell Joseph or kill Joseph? I mean, what if one of them would have said, "You know what, guys, don't do this to our brother. Just do it. If you want to sell anybody, sell me." It probably would have stopped the whole scheme, because who's going to sell Judah? Yeah, or who's going to sell somebody else in the family? But nobody stood up for Joseph. Nobody stood up for Joseph. Decided not to kill him and sell him instead. Okay, I guess that counts. That doesn't count for much, I guess. But really nobody did. And here, finally, somebody's willing to stick up for the younger brother. And to me, this is the turning point in this whole story. This is when Joseph realizes things have changed, and it's also, as you pointed out, what changes Judah's history for the next thousands of years, forever, because because of that, he's going to be gifted with being the ancestor of the Messiah. I mean, amazing! What a reward for this act of selflessness.
Mm-hmm.
What a reward! Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it cannot be understated how important, or overstated how important this moment is.
I think Judah is an example of, how shall I say this? Like his father Jacob, he has come to the point in his life where he has also overcome spiritually.
Yes, 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 he has. Yes, he has, and it's just so important, and it deserves to be emphasized in your class, because I mean, you see here these chapter divisions again. They sometimes obscure what's going on, because it ends on this kind of rhetorical question here from Judah, but then you get to chapter 45 here, and what does it say? Joseph could no longer control himself. He feels this moment. It says he cries out, "Have everyone leave my presence!" Like he doesn't want to break down in front of the Egyptians. And you got to think the brothers are terrified. Like, did we say something wrong?
Oh,
Why is he such? Right. I mean, like, this is such good drama. It is so good. And
is there a VeggieTales? Is there a VeggieTales on this one?
No. VeggieTales better not touch this one. I mean, you need a great writer. You need a great director to make this thing sing. I mean, it's so beautiful, and it needs to be handled so well, right? And so he says he wept so loud. He sends everyone away, but he weeps so loudly that the Egyptians heard them from whatever other room or part of the house or garden or wherever it is he sent them. They could still hear him crying, and somebody reported it to Pharaoh. It was so moving of a moment. Maybe they didn't understand what was going on, and he says, "What? I am Joseph," and his first question is my father still living? Well, of course he is. You just heard them say how his father was concerned about Benjamin. That might be an expression of how is he doing, not more than a literal question. Is he still alive and well, kind of a thing. And it says his brothers were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. I mean, what a juxtaposition of emotions here. There's terror and great sadness and joy all mixed up into this one room. And what does he say? "Come close to me." I mean, isn't this beautiful? It's a sign that he's forgiven them, right? He's inviting them closer. They probably had to keep a distance from him when he was Pharaoh's vizier, because there's a respect and fear there. But now it's come closer. It's an invitation to intimacy. He's like, "I'm your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt." And then he says, "Do not be afraid," kind of like what angels say whenever they appear. Because it was God, it was to save lives that God sent me here ahead of you. Just amazing. Just an amazing, amazing, amazing story. This whole chapter, I just want to read through the whole thing. And he goes down to verse 14. He throws his arms around his brother Benjamin and weeps again. Benjamin embraces him. He's crying. He kissed all his brothers and wept over all of them, right? I mean, it's just this, like all this tension that has been building for so long, ever since they sold him into slavery, ever since the story began in the Bible. there's just been this tension going up, 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 and then finally it just breaks like a dam, crack in the dam, and all the water's coming out. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful moment of reconciliation here. Finally.
And apparently, he announces who he is twice, but the second time he ends with those words, "Whom you sold into Egypt." So apparently, hearing those words the first time, "I am Joseph, your brother," must have, who knows how that hit them, but it must have taken the second statement with those additional words to convince them only this man would know what we did.
Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely. Of course. Who else could know? Man. And so what I love about this is, they had considered Joseph as the vizier to be their enemy, or at least someone hostile to them. But the one they thought was their enemy was really their savior. And I think there's a great parallel there to our own relationship with God. The one who he wants to restrict all of our fun, and he has all these commandments that we got to follow and all these kind of things. And it's like the one you think is against you is really for you. And that's really this whole story of sin with God throughout the entire scriptures. And I love is that Joseph's forgiveness is so complete that he has rewritten his own history, right? It's not you guys sold me into Egypt. He does mention that, but every time after that point, what does he say? It's God who sent me here. He says that here in verse 5. He says it here in verse 8. It was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, right? And it's amazing. It's amazing. Like he says it these several times that it was God who did this. It was God who did this. It was God who did this. He's so forgiven them and moved on that the whole history of what happened is now changed. He understands it for what it was. It wasn't so much what they did to him. It was what God has done for him. And I think when we get to heaven, we're going to come to that realization too, that our history is not one of this person hurt me and this person hurt me and this person disappointed me. We're going to look back and say, you know what? I see now how God used all of those things I went through to lead me here to paradise, to lead me to him. So how can I complain or hold a grudge anymore against these people? Look how it turned out.
So at this point, we conclude the story with the word dwell, that they dwelt there in the land of Goshen, Egypt. It's interesting that this word pops up because it really shouldn't. The posterity of Abraham should be dwelling in Canaan, and they're not. And obviously, God has had his hand in this, as Joseph understands.
Yes.
They are now in Egypt. You would think, well, if God made this promise, then why are we not up here in Canaan? Why are we dealing with a famine?
Right.
And I'll tell you, it is just a reminder for us that we cannot trust our senses. We have to claim God's promises. We must believe that he will fulfill his promises as his will seems to think best.
Yeah.
And since you mentioned heaven, let's take this a step further. Even when we do arrive in the promised land, the heavenly Canaan, yet there is a tree there with leaves that are for healing.
Mm-hmm.
Even when we enter into the final promised land, there will still be something about us that needs time to heal from this previous experience.
Yeah.
And in a similar way, we will also see for eternity the scars on the hands of Jesus. So as much as we might want to think of paradise as this utopia, it's real in the same way that our experience on this earth has been real.
Yes. Yes, it is real. Yeah, and I think we can't look, if I'm teaching this lesson this week, I really want to end on this idea of this story being a parallel for the end. It ends with heaven. Joseph, of course, is not perfect, but he represents, I think, God in this story. And you see that just at the very end, there is a time of trouble for Joseph's brothers where they're caught between the power of Egypt and their own family dysfunction, right? And the pressure keeps getting ratcheted up. Their very existence seems to be at stake here. And they have to make choices. They have to make hard choices that is going to reveal their character. And it does. And fortunately, it's a character that's been changed by God. But it's not a pleasant thing to go through. And in the end, all that dam breaks, and they have this moment. Because what does Joseph say here? He says that God has sent me ahead of you. He says to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Right. So we have that remnant language here, even in this end of Genesis, the story. So I think the parallels here are very, very, very striking. You also have a moment where, of course, Jacob wants to send these gifts, these luxuries, these delicacies to Joseph, with Benjamin to make sure that everything goes out all right. Jacob's trying to engineer it perfectly. He's done this before with Esau. He's trying to send the gifts, and he's trying to arrange it so it goes well. But in the end, it ends up with Joseph in Egypt sending his father 10 donkeys full of Egypt's luxuries. And in other words, you can't outgive God at all. You can send your best to God. Again, Joseph's only representing God. He's not God. But you can send your best to God and hope that it goes well. But it wasn't the gifts that did anything for Joseph. It wasn't the gifts. It was seeing the character of his brothers changed. That's what opened Joseph's heart. That opened all those blessings to pour out on the family. Right? He wasn't bribed. He wasn't charmed by the gifts. It had nothing to do with their money. He didn't even care about the money. They were expected to give it. I feel like we should have a moment for tithes and offerings right here. They were expected to give it, but Joseph didn't need it. He didn't need their gifts. He just wanted to see them be whole and be healthy and to repent and be changed. That's all he wanted to see. That's what mattered to him. It's the only thing that mattered to him. And it's the only thing that matters to God. Now, we should still pay for things. We should still do what's proper and right. But let's not be under any illusions here that our tithes or our offerings or our gifts in any way, shape, or form endear us to God any more than we already are. He wants to see a changed heart, is what he wants to see. I'm done preaching.
No, I just, my final notes here, I have a statement from Ellen White where she mentions that the brothers here had demonstrated fruits of true repentance.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing that you can have this many young men, brothers, who collectively had come to the point of realizing what they had done wrong and had repented of it.
Yes.
You
Yes.
don't usually see that many, but clearly it had forced itself on them with such guilt that we got godly men here. We got godly men. They understand repentance.
Yes. And again, sometimes it takes a time of trouble, a famine, in order to get us to that point. But God wants to save people, and He will orchestrate events however He needs to orchestrate them to save you. And that's why when times are good, you should just get with the program now. Let's not wait for there to be a famine in the land. You know what I mean? Let's not wait.
Yeah.
So I love it. This tale is a story not just of the reconciliation between Jacob and his sons, but there is some of that. And it's also a story of the reconciliation between the brothers and Joseph. And so we see in this story a binding together of generations of schemers and sinners. And they're brought together. Why? Like all of this Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and now Joseph and Judah and them, like all of that nastiness in that family that we've been talking about for weeks is finally, I'm not saying they're made perfect, but they're finally brought together as a family, united because of this grace which is shown them.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
Another
the family
good
of God.
study, brother. Another good
Yeah,
study.
it's good stuff. Well, I want to thank you guys for watching. I know it's a long one, but man, it is a really good lesson. Do not screw this class up, okay? Do not underprepare and just get in there and just, what do you guys want to talk about? Like, don't screw this up. This is a golden opportunity. They don't come very often when it comes to the Sabbath School lessons. Golden opportunity to talk about the gospel and the importance of grace, especially in the Old Testament. It doesn't get talked about enough. This is your opportunity if you're a teacher, if you are an A-plus student here watching this video, then hold your teacher to it. Okay, if they want to wander or get around or the clock's starting to tick down, you're saying, we haven't talked about the most important part yet, get them on track. All right, we want to see this conversation happen. You can do it however you want, but you should not have a class that doesn't talk about this beautiful, beautiful, what Tolkien would have called a eucatastrophe. A good catastrophe, just a sudden avalanche of goodness and grace and love and forgiveness that happens here at the end. Do not let that out of your sight when you guys meet for Sabbath School this week. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next week with lesson number 13, and we'll finish this quarter.